case. Fantastic, thank you. And you know that if we're going too fast, tell us, and do please continue to engage so strongly as you do. So what I'd like you to do right now is to look at what I hope you think is another nice photograph and consider this question. What is it that motivates you at work? And so think about that very personally, and please do feel free to pop your responses into the chat so that I can see it. But also think about perhaps as much from your past, I hope, more so than your present. What is it in the past that has driven you to leave an employment and find a new employer? So give me that answer if you will. What is it that motivates you at work? What makes you get out of bed each morning enthusiastically and come to work? And also, what is it in the past that has driven you to leave an employer and find new employment? Just watching the chat box to see what might come in. Lovely, thank you, Hayla. I'm getting us going there. Lovely, right, super. Super, so we're getting a range of things already. So in relationships, feeling like my work has impact, is meaningful, it makes a difference to people. Money, dollars, we all need to earn a living. However, yeah, on the converse, what has driven you away from work? Not feeling valued, having bad managers. What motivates you? Improving some aspect of the world around me, transitioning, looking for new challenges. So things that enable you to grow as individuals, and work, scope, successes realized. So that also motivates. You're giving an absolutely fantastic list of both sides of the same coin. If I flipped a coin in the air, we've got that there. So thank you all very much indeed for sharing with me at that level. Now I'm going to continue to screen share and to take us into a particular model of motivation. That is around this binary theory. Again, just pop me a yes, no in the chat box, if you will. Who has come across Hertzberg's theory of motivation in the past? Just give me a yes or a no. Okay, and there's no test. It's no. It's really, I'm just trying to gauge the room to see where you are on it. So, right, fantastic. Thank you. I can see lots of these coming in. And you saw me just take a sip of my afternoon coffee. So let me continue then to describe this. It's actually in many ways quite an old theory of motivation because it dates all the way back to the 1950s. So we're talking some 70 years ago. So is it going to be possible that a theory of motivation first developed, observed, studies? There was an empirical study around it, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that study. Can that even hold water? Can it still be true some 70 years on? So already start thinking about that. As you can see, two columns in front of you. On the left-hand side, we've got a list of what Hertzberg identified as the motivators here, and he listed these then following his study as achievement, recognition, the work itself, responsibility, advancement and growth. And if you think about how those relate to the things you've just been putting into the chat box versus what he called the hygiene factors: company policies, supervision, relationships, work conditions, remuneration, salary, security. So longevity of, feeling secure in your job that it's not going to disappear tomorrow and that you will be out of work. So all those years ago, Hertzberg did a study which was actually set in Pittsburgh, USA. So it's USA based, and it was predominantly set among white males. So bear that in mind as well. So, you might want to, in your head, critique any of this from that perspective. And he did this conversational study first off about, well, what makes you come to work? What keeps you here? So it's the very sorts of questions I've asked you. From the phrases that he got back, he distilled those down into, I think it was 13 motivators and 13 hygiene factors in total, if my memory serves me right. And he then did a wider study to test whether that held true among a wider population. And he found that they did. And he found from his observations at that time that he could divide them into these two headings. Motivators. Well, that's fairly obvious what that means. It is what enables you to get out of bed and come to work and feel happy to come to work. Versus what he called were the hygiene factors. Now, these he observed don't particularly make you get up and come to work, but if they are wrong, then you actually start to complain about them, and they kind of take on a greater weight, a greater import. So if the company policies aren't right, I'll complain about them. If the work conditions, quite literally, physically, the work conditions are not right, I will complain about them. And I have a story from my own experience here. When I was working in a national UK-based voluntary organisation in the late 1980s. And it was an organisation that worked with people with disabilities, physical disabilities. And the office I worked in was a 1960s building that had fallen into disrepair. So the lift didn't always work. The carpets were very uneven. And bear in mind that our volunteers were themselves people with this particular disability, so they might not be able to get their wheelchairs over it, they might not be able to rely on the lift to get to the third floor where our office was. And people started to complain bitterly about the work conditions. The organisation took the decision that as the leases came up on each building, we would get rid of the old buildings and we would invest in new purpose-built buildings. And we all got super excited about this. And the organisation was very good. As the buildings were ready for us to occupy, they took the teams of staff members to the new buildings so we could participate in where we would each sit and all of that. And we all said, it's going to be great when we get into our new building. It's going to solve all our problems of any amount of demotivation that's around. And it did for around about 2 weeks to a month. And then we all started to complain again. And it's because whilst now that had been put right, the work conditions had been put right, they were now state of the art. But actually what was really at fault was that we were not working well in terms of the motivators. So right now I'm going to get you into get you to do some group work quite briefly. And I'm just looking for my notes. I'd like you to consider, therefore, a time when you were either motivated or demotivated at work, and if it would help you, oops. Oh, which way am I going? I'm trying to go backwards and it's not going backwards. There we are, it's going now. Right. Oh, very odd. Okay, to this screen. Okay, I'd like you to think about if either of these things were at play when you were motivated or demotivated. And the other thing I would like you to think about in that same short period of time together, which is only, how long have I set for this one, Anne?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, so it's only a short time. I'd also like you to think about which of these two columns can you as a manager more readily influence on a day-by-day basis. So is it easier for you to influence the motivators or is it easier for you as a manager to influence the hygiene factors? Okay, those are the questions. I'll stop screen sharing. I'll hand you back out over to Anne, and you've got 5 minutes to discuss those 2 areas.
Andrea, what was the second part of the
Don't worry,
assignment?
I'm doing it already. I'm already
Oh,
writing
okay.
the broadcast. Oh, that's kind of strange.
So I ended up doing a group of just 2.
That's fine.
Okay. I figured if someone came in, I'd just add them to that group.
Yeah. Oh, I think I'll come again. Oh. Wonderful. I think everyone is back. So welcome back. So nearly back. Yeah, here we go. Everyone's back now. So I asked you to think about which of those you kind of resonated really for you mostly under the 2 columns of motivators and hygiene factors. So that's a little bit of a follow on from that first opening question that you put into the chat. But perhaps let's just spend a minute or 2 minutes thinking about that second question I posed. Which of these 2 columns do you as a manager have most influence over, do you think? Let me do the screen share again so that you have it in front of you. Are you more able to influence the motivators or the hygiene factors, or is it evenly spread? I don't know. What do you think? Please feel free to open a mic, or things are coming into the chat, I can see. Yeah. So at the moment, motivators has it from at least 2 of you. So I'll just wait and see if there are any other comments. So I've got somebody else who says both. So I've got 2 boths, 3 on motivators. So it's 3-2 at the moment to motivators. If I were to do it as, you know, numbers, if we were playing a sport and we're counting the goals. Okay, so I don't think there is an absolute answer. I'm not looking for a right or a wrong here. But what always occurs to me as a manager is that every day of my working life, I can actually do something in terms of one-to-one conversations with my staff members so I can understand what it is they want to achieve personally. Yeah, so the personal achievement conversation. I can always recognize them for the work they do. It's that simple phrase, thank you. Yeah, it's so important. The work itself. In any job, there is always some fairly dull and tedious work to do as well. I can make sure it's not always the same person who gets the dull and tedious work. I can make sure that I spread the opportunity to take part in projects around. Responsibility, I can give people responsibility for projects. If they are saying to me they are looking for a next step up in the organisation or even outside, I can have those developmental conversations with them, which then also links to growth. Now, when it comes to the hygiene factors, I do hope that your organisations are very transparent, open, collaborative with you, and therefore you may well have forums where you can participate in the development of company policies. But I bet none of you is actually outright fully responsible for a whole company policy. If I look down here, these two, so there were a couple of you who said both. And so actually, I think it's these two around supervision and relationships, where if we move it from being binary, I might want to put those kind of somewhere here over the middle of these two lines, because I am responsible for the kind of relationships I build with my staff members. I am responsible for making sure I have supervision sessions with my staff members. Work conditions, in the story I told you, it wasn't up to me whether we left that building or not. And yes, I have some responsibilities under health and safety. So reporting where the carpet was torn and dangerous, but I still was not responsible for the whole building. Remuneration and salary, in that organisation, I could influence a tiny portion of each person's salary, but I was not setting the salary grade, so I only had a small relationship to it. And security, I could no more secure somebody in their job, guarantee that the roles would be here in a year or 5 years' time than my boss could for me. So that would be my particular take. And I'm just having a little look. So, yeah, I can see there's things going on in the chat, which is great. Super. Right. So I can influence hygiene factors. Yeah, lovely. Some, but it's in a more sporadic frequency during the annual performance review. Perfect. That's a further illustration of the point that I was making in that piece just now. Fantastic. Yeah, thank yous. Oh, lovely. Thank yous in an inbox folder, looking at them when you have a bad day. Yeah, reminding your staff members. Lovely techniques here. Fantastic. Thank you all very much indeed for that. Now, what I'm going to do is stop sharing that screen. I'm going to try and bring us pretty much up to date. And I'm going to take us out onto YouTube, and I'm going to play a just over 10-minute YouTube video for you from an author called Dan Pink. And he has written a book called The Surprising Thing. The Surprising Thing About Motivation. Yeah. And we're going to take a brief look at it. I will ask you at the end of that video to simply put into the chat box which of the 3 main points resonates with you most, again, as a manager, managing others and needing to motivate them, and also thinking about which of these motivates you most as well. So if you'd like to hold the record now, because I know the record won't be that screen share. Lovely, Anne, thank you very much. So let me come back to you. I've put that link for you in the chat so that if you wish to go and take another look at it, please do. And the thing I asked you to think about, oh lovely, so there's some thumbs up coming up, right? There were 3 main messages in there: autonomy, mastery and purpose. How does that fit in with what we've just been looking at so far today around your own motivation and the motivation of others? Please feel free to open a mic. We're not very many in the room today, so I can happily take that. Let's see who might want to come in or pop any comments in the chat. That's fine. Just give you a moment or two to do that. Stuart.
I appreciated the purpose motive versus the profit motive, and comparing those two and showing scientifically through, studies they've done and with different groups, how that does play out. And I'm trying to figure out how I can translate that into some of the tasks and motivations that we provide as a corporation and me as an individual manager to staff at our organization.
Okay, right, super. Yeah, it does look at profit, not for profit. I guess the one bit that I always, I hesitate over one particular phrase that Dan Pink uses. And he talks about the trick being to pay people enough to take salary off the table. Now, he's done his study, there's no doubt about that. And that works absolutely in the for-profit sector. But you're in the not-for-profit sector. Organisations like yours often can't pay enough to take money off the table. And actually, I think, therefore, we as managers have to be even smarter at the autonomy, mastery and purpose thing. Now, I am going to bet that you've already, all of you, got purpose in the bag, because your organisations talk about values, purpose, mission, making a difference. And so I think that one of the things that you have to do as managers is to keep on translating that big picture direction for your staff members so that they understand where their job fits into that big picture and the purpose. So that might help. And then the autonomy and mastery, I think that this comes down partly to our own style as a manager. If you think about situational leadership, we looked at direction, coaching, supporting and directing. And in an ideal world, we get people round to being delegated to more often than not. Now, that actually gives people high degrees of autonomy. So, that would be great if we can think in those terms. And mastery, I think, does relate neatly back to Hertzberg of 70 years ago, who talked about recognition, achievement, growth. So ensuring in our one-to-one conversations, at least quarterly, we are asking people about where they see themselves in a year's time. How can I help you get there? How can I develop things? So yes, Emma, you've picked up the point I've just made there about many of the things that Dan Pink references being related to the motivators column of his theory, and yeah, how that fits together, I think, quite reasonably. So what I wanted to do there, to summarize, is to contrast a piece of motivational study of all those years ago with something that's more current, and actually say, I think there's so much we can do as a manager to create a motivational atmosphere for our staff members. So let me now come back to screen sharing so I can take us on to the next piece, which is, okay, let me just do a couple of things here. And just give me a thumbs up. Are you looking at the motivators, hygiene factors screen again? Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. That's really helpful. I've got myself confused between my two screens then. So you've done the group work on that, and let me move this out of the way as well. So I've already emphasised that listening, we all have over the course of working together now on these few occasions. We've emphasised the role of listening. And I think this picture works quite nicely. One of the images, one of the people is a manager, one of the people is a staff member, one is talking and it's coming out and it's got to be unravelled in the listener's head. But is listening hard as a manager? Why is listening hard? And that question, why is listening hard, assumes that it is indeed difficult for us all to do. So let's do a bit of practice around that. I hope a little bit of fun. You're going to be working in pairs. Because we've not got an even number today, there is going to be a group of 3. Now, you're all going to see in the chat box any second now, because I know is going to post it, there is a link. Grab that link, but please don't open it yet. Okay, grab it, but please don't open it yet. I can see Annie's work. There it is. She's already put it in. Grab it, but don't open it. Once you are in your pairs, I need you to decide who is going to be the communicator and who is going to be the listener. The listener is going to need to grab a pen and a piece of paper, or pencil and paper. The communicator is then going to click on the link and their job is to describe absolutely what you see, and the job of the listener is to replicate what is being described to you, what is being described to you. I can see other comments coming in about that last activity. I will have a read of that while you are out in your groups. Once you're in your pairs, there will be 1, 3, as I said, so have 2 people who are replicating what they hear. And also, once you're in those pairs and groups, the person replicating cannot ask questions. So I'm taking that clarification opportunity away from you. No questions. Handing over to Anne now so that she can send you to your groups. Well done, Anne. Fantastic. So how did you get on with that then? Do you want to put your cameras on and do any sharing of the results? Wow, Annie, that's great. That's great. Who was your partner, can I ask?
My partner was Emma.
Was Emma, of course, you came back together. Emma, you must have done a great job in communicating there. So anybody else prepared to do that share piece? Put cameras on. Yeah, somebody's coming in. Stuart, got you. Who was your partner?
Delphine.
Delphine. Unfortunately, I can't see the drawing very well. So could
Yeah,
you
my background is blurred, so I need to remove that. 1 moment.
okay, fine.
There you go. Look at the reaction, Stuart. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Anyone else want to share the results of their work? I'm entirely in your hands. And as you do, you could just carry on and do it. That's fine. How difficult was that? Was it difficult at all, or not really? Open your mics. I'm very happy for you to take it that way. Or turn it the other way. What was helpful where you were doing the drawing from the person who was communicating to you? What was really helpful? I'm just watching the chat box to see if anything comes in there.
Were we allowed to say what the image was?
Right, so right, that's interesting. So I'm just looking back at the instructions that went into the chat box, so I'm not actually sure that you saw that now, so I'm going to read it out. Get a pen and piece of paper. Person A, who's being given a picture, describe the picture clearly but without showing it to your partner, and person B draws the picture as you heard it described. So by implication, no, it wasn't actually saying that it was a house, but it was describing the picture. But I'm just wondering the degree to which that came along. However, nevertheless, even if you knew it was a house, the degree of accuracy of communication would have affected many things in the resulting drawing, wouldn't it? So it still works as an activity. And what about me removing the possibility of you being able to ask questions for clarification? How did that affect it?
Very difficult.
Right.
When I saw this as an active listening exercise, I thought, oh, good, I can ask questions. But you said I couldn't ask questions, and I cheated and did anyway. But yes, it was very difficult.
Oh, Stuart, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I do artificially take away from you the opportunity to ask questions, because that's what most of us do most of the time. And that's absolutely fine and fair. However, I'm about to give you a really major message. Okay, so let me come back to my screen share and get you all thinking about this. Right, should be coming up, and then we did the group work, and here, right, okay. What I did was I forced you into this first level of listening, which is called unfiltered listening. So I took away the opportunity for you to respond or ask questions. Now, for most of us, in most of our life, that's social as well as work. As soon as someone is communicating to us, I'd like you to be honest with yourself right now. We are actually not truly listening. We are working up what our response is. So we've actually pretty much stopped listening. Yeah. Does that make sense? Is that too radical a thing for me to present to you? True. So this looks as though there's an element of, well, I do that. Yeah, there's an element of truth, isn't there, in what I've said? Yeah. It's human nature, but I want you to think about, as a good manager, there are times, and I can't really be prescriptive about when they will be exactly. Your manager gut instinct will begin to tell you this from here on in, now that I've given you that message, that there are occasions when we should quieten down our head talk and truly listen to what's being said, the way it's being said, and what's not being said. The next thing, so this is a bit like a step-by-step guide, really. So then I want you to start to build in, once you've done that unfiltered listening, then it's the time to reflect back. And the kind of things that you might say then is, so let me see if I've understood you correctly. You seemed to say that, okay? One of two things is going to happen here. That person is going to say, that's exactly what I said. And now, perhaps for the first time, they feel truly heard. So this is probably going to be an appropriate tactic, a 4-step device, when you know that emotions might be running slightly high, or there's some very strong vested interest in it, something like that. And let me give you the other thing that sometimes happens at that step 2. At step 2, the person might say, that's not what I said at all. Even if in your head you are now thinking, well, yes, that's exactly what you said. However, if they don't perceive that that's what they said, they may need to, you may need to come back to, okay, so run it by me again, tell me again, so that I really can understand. And it's actually only by jumping backwards and forwards between 1 and 2, perhaps a few times on those really testy conversations, that you can begin to then come in with questions. So then I'll let you back in with questions, Stuart, all right? Yeah. So now you can start to really unpack. Tell me why you think that. How did you arrive at that? What were your emotions at the time? How can I help you? Yeah. So that's when you can use a whole raft of questions. Then together, start generating some ideas between you. And I'm emphasizing that notion of between you because the more they are jointly generated, and perhaps actually even more so that party generates them rather than you do, the more likely that person is to commit to any action that comes out of those ideas as a result of it. Now, you know, I could argue that this list of steps is simplistic. It possibly is, but you know what? I see myself as rather a simplistic soul, in that when I'm in a relationship and in a conversation with a staff member, and where there may be I'm aware of some emotions for that individual and possibly also for me, having some clear steps can help to keep me on track. And I think those are 4 that we could just about learn and carry around with us to help us through that. Does any of that make sense? Please feel free to open a mic or make a comment in the chat box about how and where you might feel that you could apply that particularly. I'll just let that go through your own filter system momentarily. I'm entirely happy to take anything either written or verbal or move on. I'm trying to be guided by you. So what I am going to do is hold up a book to the screen. I'll hopefully have time to put this I'm just flicking through some of the comments that have come in now. Okay, right, fine, super, thank you. Right, I'm going to hold the book up to the screen, which actually I think builds on this notion of active listening really well. And it is, there you are. Can you just about see it? I've also got light coming in through my window. There we are, that's a little bit better. It's called Time to Think by, got it? Nancy Kline, Kline. Time to Think by Nancy Kline. It's a very accessible book, and it can really a little higher. Right, let me pop this my lines there. That might also help. I've also got my screen on, which doesn't help. I can't quite grab it. Keeps disappearing. I'll pop it in the chat box. I'm just gonna pop it in right now. Chat. There we go. Time to think. Time to think. Except I can't spell. Nancy Kline. That's the one, exactly. Listening to ignite the human mind. Perfect. Thank you for your help. That's perfect. Perfect. So my book recommendation of the day for you. So I need to move us on. I've got about half an hour with you today. And I hope that what we're looking at today now kind of builds into feedback, because it's, you know, that communication is two-way. We spent some time looking at communication last week as well. And look at these images here. You know, when did we last get some survey that asked us to either give, you know, smileys or frownies about some experience we had? Very often, you know, we're on the internet so much, we get these surveys all the time. Every time we pass through an airport or something like that, we're invited to give our feedback. So let's have a look at some of the best practice in this. So what is feedback? Well, feedback in this context, it's the process of giving people information about the results of their actions. I often think of it like this. When I am doing something, I can't quite have an out-of-body experience and watch myself doing it. And so if I've got someone else who is playing that role, the observer, they can be very useful to me afterwards in a conversation about how that came across, how it landed, etc. So it's the process of giving people information about the results of their actions. It's that intent versus impact stuff again. What's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is therefore for me to see myself as others see me. Oh, sometimes that's not a pretty sight, you know. I have to be bold enough to take that, learn some of those lessons as well. But equally, Sometimes it's absolutely great and it's a real lift to our spirit and confidence around something. And therefore it's about highlighting the strengths so that I can do more of that, but it's also about identifying some of those development areas. Why is feedback important? It's important because it has the potential to improve levels of performance if it's done well. But now here's a link back to motivation. If feedback is done badly, it can so demotivate people. So we really need to think carefully about how we are doing it. The phrase I often use, you know how Shakir's got some fantastic one-liners, hasn't he? Phrases that really resonate with us as managers. One of mine that relates absolutely to what I'm looking at right now is the idea of catching people doing things right. Now, even if there is a development area somewhere else, that doesn't mean to say I ignore that and dismiss that totally, because we may need a conversation about it. But the more we can catch people doing things right, actually, somehow miraculously, they do less of the other things poorly. Yeah. So think about that as a phrase, see if that works for you, because it has the potential to improve performance. Why is it difficult? There's an assumptive in that question. There is the assumption that indeed it is difficult. And where you think it is difficult, it is you or one thinks it's difficult. It's usually because people don't like to give criticism. And remember that word criticism is positive as well as for improvement to people. And instead, we go, oh no, I might make things worse if I mention it. So I, as a manager, I put my head in the sand like an ostrich, and I pretend it's going to miraculously cure itself and be addressed. It won't. So we as managers have a responsibility to learn how to do this stuff, give feedback. How to give feedback. So some top tips here. We should always make sure that our own heads are in the right place when we are about to give some feedback, which is constructive and positive, or is constructive, but it's about some negative behavior. And in doing that, you might like to think about, it's that impact intent again. So what's our intent going to be? Getting our heads in the right place. It should include positive reinforcement of strengths. It should describe the actual behavior. So I noticed you did X, Y, and Z. That was really helpful to whoever, yeah? And claim it, use the word I noticed as well. So that's really powerful in terms of that. It should always be in an area where a person has responsibility for it, so that they can either do more of it or improve it. And it should describe but not judge them. So let me try and give you an example of this. I'm going to read you out two phrases, and you might like to tell me which of these you think is better in terms of feedback. And they are, number one, I get the impression that you're not interested in your work anymore. Or number two, you've lost interest in your work. So which is better, number one or number two? Is it number one, I get the impression that you're not interested in your work anymore? Or number two, you've lost interest in your work? Which do you think? One. Yeah, number one, number two. Right, we've got 2 1s, we've got 3 1s and 1 2. Right, okay, so I am now going to be so bold as to say, I think number one is the better statement, because the fact I have the impression is correct. There is obviously something in the behavior that has given me that impression. So I get the impression, and you might then elaborate, because you did X, Y, and Z. It also gives the other party the opportunity to say, no, that's not the case at all. I am entirely interested in my work, but you just don't realize that I've got stuff going on at home or wherever it might be. So now at least you can have a conversation. It might be for you an uncomfortable conversation, but hopefully now you can start to find out what's going on at an appropriate level for that staff member in order to then say, so what can I do to help? How can I help in the workplace that maybe takes that pressure off a little bit? Whereas if I say, you've lost, look how I'm pointing your finger, and I'm very consciously pointing my finger at the camera right now. You've lost interest in your work. That's so accusatory. It's so setting up conflict. Getting out of that is going to be very difficult. So I hope I've explained some of that in terms of the how to give. When to give, it should be as close to the incident, the thing you observed, as possible, because it is freshest in both of our minds. Don't save it up for the right time. The right time is never going to come. Yeah. So the more immediate, the better. And then it's dealt with, done, sorted out, you can move on. So a model which some people can find quite helpful, sorry, that didn't populate very well. So I'd like you to think of us as individuals, as onions. You slice through an onion and you've got all of these layers that you can see here. And I think some arrows are coming up. Oh, they are good. And they're going to go into various parts. At the very center of the onion of us as individuals is our personality. And it is thought that our personality changes very little over time. The Andrea working with you now has always been my lifelong sort of character whose glass of life is half full. I have a tendency towards positivism and optimism. Not naive. I've had my knocks and blows in life as well, but I can ride that out. Other people might be different from that, but it's really very sticky, doesn't change much. The next thing that we are made up of are our attitudes. And these tend to come from all of the formative influences. So it's the culture in which we were born and brought up, the way things happen there. It's literally the culture of our family, the way, or our individual circumstances, really as a youngster, how we do that learning. That also doesn't change much throughout our lives. But the last thing on the outside, these are our behaviors that we wear like a wardrobe. And I've got a wardrobe that I wear to come to work. You know, it's that professionalism, it's the learned stuff. And I have behaviors that I would use within my family, when I'm playing tennis, when I'm on the ski slope, which you can probably see that I love so much. Yes, so that's how I have a different way of being. Now, you actually, in your organizations, very probably have the vehicle by which you can give feedback about behaviors in the workplace, because I'll bet most of your organizations have expressed values. And think about Dan Pink and the purpose, what we're here to do. And many of your organizations will also have competency frameworks as well. And that really becomes a fantastic vehicle to link together to be able to give feedback to an individual about their behaviors. So let's look at one other model briefly, and then you're going to go into the last bit of feedback. And I suspect I'm going to switch that out to something like 6 or 7 minutes. So just be on the ready. I can see you nodding and thumbs up. Thank you very much for that. So a model that you can use to give that feedback is SBI, the SBI model. And you describe the situation. So you are as specific and use those I phrases. you describe the behavior when you did X, Y, and Z in that meeting. It really contributed to that. And then the impact, as a result, people understood what you were asking them to do. Thank you so much for that. I'd like to see you replicate that going forward. Or in that meeting, I noticed that when you were describing what you wanted people to do, you did not give them an end goal or an end date. As a result of that, people went away and might now be unclear about when you want to hear back from them. I'd like you to think about that, so next time you give a message, you can bring that clarity to the discussion. Now, I've just given you two very simplistic examples in that, but I hope you can see the SBI model and a way of using that practically, because I think that's what your final short breakout group is going to be around. So if you'd like to just, in fact, I'm just going to come back a moment. If you would like to do a screen grab of that SBI, because in your breakout room, and I think you're going to be working in threes, you are, I'd like you to think about, one of you may well have an opportunity in the next few days to give someone some feedback, and however you are planning on giving that feedback, I'd like you to use the other two people in your room to have a go at formulating that feedback in that way, SBI. So you might just need to give a little bit of context. I won't ask for the story of the situation to come back, but I will just touch base with you about how that worked out, how that landed, how useful it was as a model. I'm going to stop my screen share now. I'm handing back over to Anne, and she's going to get you off out to your work groups. Thank you for your time. I think you all back. Fantastic. I'm just going to close one window that I don't need now. How was that as a model? Any use, any reactions? Either open a microphone or pop a comment in chat. I don't mind how I take it. Any thoughts?
We discussed a bit in our group about the immediate feedback and whether immediate was always beneficial or necessary, because the manager it may be a frustration, and so there may be emotion being delivered, and then also just the time to process how we want to say it in a constructive way and so forth to get those things laid out. Sometimes, whether it's working with direct reports or working with my children, it can be the immediate may not always be best.
Yes, I take that point entirely. I think what I was trying to emphasize and clearly did not do it well was that I don't want things leaving for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. You've lost your moment there. I think there's a great wisdom in taking stock and thinking about how you're going to do it. Stuart, perfect. Very happy for that. And then I'm looking at a couple more in the right, and that was about those emotions in the immediate. Yeah. Edson, you put something in, I'm just reading it. Right, so I think you've shared the particular example about the questions you would ask. Perfect in that situation. Brilliant work, super. Yeah, you discussed it as a scenario. Got it. Fantastic. Love it. Love it. I'm actually going to press something else now into the chat box for you. I've put there a link to another author, consultant, US-based consultant, and it's someone called Shari Harley. And she has developed, rather than the 3-stage model that I shared with you of SBI, situation, behavior, impact, she's got an 8-step feedback formula. And there's a link there to a YouTube. Now, on that YouTube, it's actually fairly lengthy, which is why I don't generally run it. I give it to you so you can go and take a look at it if you wish. I think it's almost 15 minutes. And you see her speaking at a conference, and it's a conference to doctors' practices and a whole range of staff, from admin to clinical staff within the doctors' practices. And they are all managers, and she's talking about giving feedback. That 8-step formula is very, very useful. So if you can carve out 15 minutes in your diary to take a look at it, it's there. She uses quite a lot of humour in it. It's not inappropriate humour in any way. So please don't let me give you that impression. But if humour in that setting doesn't work for you, that's fine. Just open it, close it, go away. But even if you think the 8-step formula might be, if you just Google Shari Harley 8-step formula, you'll get the words of the 8-step formula that again could add some value to it. So I'm just going to share the screen now with you for a final time. Wrong one, that one. There we go. Yeah, okay. So I've come back to where I positioned you before you went into your groups. So I think there I've got some bullet points which summarize good practice in giving the right feedback. We've covered those, I think. If you want to screen grab that, please feel free. I'm just hesitating to allow any of you who wish to do so to do so. And then I'm going to give you a last few bits on the other end, the receiving end of feedback, because we are going to be receiving feedback from our managers. We're going to be receiving feedback from other departments, perhaps from other partners within our NGOs, and also feedback from our staff members. So stop your initial reaction. That brings us back to don't let your head work up the defensive reaction or the thank you. Listen first off, unfiltered listening. Relax, breathe deeply, listen actively, know your limits. So if it is in any way a message that's hard to take, know your limits. And if you've had enough, oh, can I go away and think about that for a while? Perfectly legitimate. When you've heard it out, summarize and reflect what you hear and ask for clarification. You can still exercise your option to accept what's been said, reject it, or put it on hold. And equally, whether that feedback said thank you, or whether the feedback said, I'd appreciate it if you could look at how you do this piece of work, express appreciation if you genuinely feel that, yeah? So simplified, acknowledge what was said, accept the feedback if appropriate, depending on that last screen, make a plan to address it, and then recommit to go forward. Our job today is done. I think I've got some questions that I'd like you to think about between now and tomorrow, because as you know, Shaquille couldn't join us today. I'm going to ask Shaquille to use these 3 questions with you first thing tomorrow in the chat, so we orientate him back into this session. And they are what? What did you observe or learn from today's session that will stay with you? So what? Why is that you observed important to you? And now what? What are you going to do or change about your behavior? And otherwise, again, let me just hover momentarily so you can screen grab those questions so I can get Shaquille to start with those tomorrow. And otherwise, precisely on 1:30, I'll say a huge thank you to you for today's participation. See you tomorrow for Working with People. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye now. You're welcome. You're welcome. Brilliant. Let me grab the